This is the American Forces Network, Europe.
It's 10 o'clock in Central Europe. The Supreme Court hands down a number of rulings. Primary elections tomorrow in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. Communist forces continue to advance unchecked in the Central Highlands. And the opposition Christian Democrats say they'll try to oust Western Chancellor Willy Brandt in a Wednesday parliamentary vote.
The 10 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, with reports from the major American networks and comments.
Good evening, this is John Wood, AFN News reporting. Officials at Kennedy have revised the schedule for the Apollo 16 astronauts who still are orbiting the moon. The astronauts now are slated to fire the rocket in their command ship and blast out of lunar gravity at about 3:15 tomorrow morning, Central European time. For a report on the other items on today's schedule for the Apollo astronauts, here's NBC correspondent Peter Hackett.
Compared to the 3 days of intense physical effort on the moon, what remains of the Apollo 16 flight will be relatively easy. Among the items on today's schedule, they'll send the upper half of the lunar module Orion, which was their ferry boat from the moon back to Command Module Casper. Orion goes crashing back to the moon this afternoon. They'll release a small instrument satellite to continue to orbit the moon for a year. And at 9:16 p.m. Eastern Time, they'll blast their way out of moon orbit and head for home. It's been a record-breaking flight. They're bringing back 245 pounds of moon rock. That's 30 pounds more than the first 3 flights combined. They're bringing back the biggest single rock, 40 pounds. They spent more time outside on the moon, and they traveled faster on the moon than anyone else, 11 miles an hour in their electric moon car. Apollo 16 is heading for splashdown in the Pacific Thursday afternoon. Peter Hackett at the NBC News Apollo Space Center.
It's 7 o'clock in Central Europe. Apollo 16 has begun its journey home. South Vietnamese troops try frantically to stem North Vietnamese tide. Primary elections are slated for Pennsylvania and Massachusetts today, and a move is afoot to topple West German Chancellor Brandt's government.
The 7 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, with reports from the major American networks, sports, and stock market activity.
Good morning, this is Milt Fullerton in Frankfurt. The Apollo 16 moonship and its 3-man crew are on the way home to Earth. The craft blasted out of moon orbit at about 3:30 a.m. Central European time to begin the 250,000-mile, 66-hour journey home. The Apollo 16 will be carrying 245 pounds of moon rock and soil samples when it splashes down in the Pacific Thursday. Yesterday, astronauts Tom Mattingly, John Young, and Charles Duke jettisoned their lunar landing module, but it went out of control before ground controllers could send it crashing into the moon as planned. The spacemen also released a small orbiting device to study the moon's gravity, but it won't be able to communicate with Earth until the lunar lander's radio dies. They're both on the same frequency. U.S. and Soviet space experts decided to move farther in the direction of joint space ventures. After months of talks in Moscow in the United States, the two sides have agreed to build scale models of a docking system in which U.S. and Russian spaceships would be compatible enough to allow link-ups in space. The U.S. Space Agency says that it could dock 3 men in an Apollo capsule with a Soviet space laboratory in 1975 if both sides were to agree this year to try such a project.
It's 12 noon in Central Europe. 2 more bases fall to North Vietnamese hands in the Central Highlands offensive as Saigon forces fall back to Kontum City.
AFN News and Sports Roundup. A summary of developments from the wires of the AP and UPI. First, the news.
Good afternoon. This is Bob Andresen in Frankfurt. This hour, as the command ship Casper races toward Earth. Astronauts John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly fired the main engine of their command ship while they were behind the moon early today. sending them on their 66-hour, 240,000-mile voyage home. The only major event on our leisurely schedule today is a walk in deep space by Thomas Mattingly to retrieve 2 moon-mapping film canisters from an equipment bay at the rear of the command ship. That moonwalk is scheduled for about 9 o'clock tonight, Central European time. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration reports that Soviet and American experts have agreed to build a scale model of a docking system as a forerunner to a possible joint manned spaceflight in 1973. NASA made the disclosure in announcing that working groups of the two nations have approved a second set of reports on studies of compatible rendezvous and docking systems.
It's 6 o'clock in Central Europe. A communist drive toward the key town of Kon Tum in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam, voting in 2 important stateside primary elections, and Apollo 16 heads earthward.
The 6 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments with Today in Europe, compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, including reports from the major American networks.
Good evening. I'm David Minot in Frankfurt. 16-moon mission, an endeavor which appeared to be near failure more than once, is nearing its end with nothing but praise for John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly. CBS newsman Reed Collins reports that one of the problems on the flight caused concern last night as the astronauts rocketed out of moon orbit and headed for Earth.
There was concern as the spacecraft dived behind the moon, concern about the backup guidance system on the engine, the same flaw that forced the delay in landing on the moon. But the backup was never needed, and at the predicted time, Apollo 16 reappeared, swinging in a wider arc, up and away from the moon, with Earth just 66 hours away. And as the spacemen came around the bend for the last time, their target, home, rose from the lunar horizon.
The Earthrise was just beautiful. It just came up like gangbusters. We were looking right out the window, and there you came, and right now you're almost just a crescent Earth, just a very sliver out there. And I tell you, we can hardly wait. I know we got a couple of things to do before we get there, but we're looking forward to it.
Later today, one of the things to do, Ken Mattingly will climb out of the command ship, work his way to the rear of the service module, and retrieve film cassettes, which are part of the orbital scientific experiments. The next time the hatch opens should be Thursday, as Apollo 16 rides the waves of the South Pacific Ocean. Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
One of the last things the astronauts did last night before going to sleep was what has become the traditional television spectacular from space, a combination of light-hearted comedy and scientific demonstrations for the audience back on Earth. Del Vaughn of CBS News describes the Apollo 16 production as a kind of home movie.
Before they went to sleep last night, the Apollo 16 astronauts put on a television show for ground controllers in Houston. A look at the moon from their position 9,000 miles away. From that distance, it looked like the skull of the man in the moon. Duke commented they had landed right on the cheekbone. Then it was home movie time with some acrobatics by the now bearded astronauts. The trio will be up at mid-morning. The day schedule calls for Ken Mattingly to climb out of the command capsule and retrieve film from cameras mounted outside the craft. The track for Earth is near perfect. A scheduled mid-course correction may not be needed. And if all goes well, Apollo 16 will splash down in the Pacific on Thursday. Del Vaughn, CBS News Space Headquarters in New York.
Back on Earth, NASA geologists are described as very happy with the samples picked up by the Apollo 16 crew and report that radiation sensors indicate the landing area as one of the highest concentrations of aluminum and silica found on the moon. The experts hope some of the rocks returning aboard the command ship Casper may date back as many as 4.5 billion years. Attention now is being directed toward the South Pacific area where the Apollo 16 is to splash down Thursday. Late reports indicate the weather will be satisfactory during the recovery phase. The Apollo moon mission, like all the manned lunar explorations so far, was an all-American effort, but steps are being taken to work out a cooperative space venture between the United States and the Soviet Union. Experts from both nations meeting in Houston announced that they have agreed to build a scale model of a docking system which could be installed aboard the manned spacecraft of both countries. The action is part of the first tentative steps which hopefully will lead to joint orbital missions in the future.
It's 7 o'clock in Central Europe. 1 p.m. in Washington, where the White House has just announced the return of Henry Kissinger from Moscow.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good evening. This is Paul Macco in Frankfurt. 16 astronauts have left the moon's sphere of influence as they speed home to Earth. The command ship has passed through a so-called twilight zone in space where the gravitational pull of Moon and Earth are equal. Once across this invisible line, Earth's gravity began exerting an influence on the spaceship. Mission Control told the spacemen, "Old Mother Earth's got you now and you're coming home." One of the astronauts replied, "That's nice to know." At the time, the astronauts were nearly 30,000 miles from the moon and some 215,000 miles from Earth. The main event on the astronauts' schedule today is a spacewalk by command pilot Thomas Mattingly. He will retrieve film cassettes he used while orbiting the moon.
It's 8 o'clock in Central Europe. The White House discloses that Henry Kissinger spent the last 4 days conferring with Soviet leaders in Moscow. AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI. Good evening. I'm Dan Allen, AFN News in Frankfurt reporting. 2 astronauts entered the Earth's gravitational field today, and a short while later fired their spacecraft's jet engine for a few seconds to refine their course. They're aiming for a Pacific Ocean splashdown scheduled for Thursday. The only major activity scheduled for today is Thomas Mattingly's spacewalk to retrieve 2 film canisters from the rear of the command ship. The walk is scheduled for about 1 hour from now. The 3 men completed a 5-day exploration of the moon before blasting toward home last night. It's 9 o'clock in Central Europe. Another secret mission for Henry Kissinger. AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI. Good evening. This is John Schill reporting in Frankfurt. Team has adjusted its course for the splashdown point 170 miles southeast of Christmas Island in the Pacific Thursday. John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly fired the spacecraft's engine for 8 seconds to make the adjustment. A spacewalk at about this hour by Mattingly to retrieve 2 film canisters from the equipment bay of Apollo 16 is the only major task remaining before splashdown. It's 10 o'clock in Central Europe. Dr. Kissinger secretly visits Moscow. Republicans move to block entry of secret Indochina documents into the congressional record. Chancellor Brandt wins a round in Bonn. And Egyptian President Sadat says he's trying to get more arms from the West.
AFN News and Sports Roundup. A summary of developments from the wires of the AP and UPI. First, the news.
Good evening. This is Paul Macco in Frankfurt. 2 astronauts have fired a successful mid-course correction rocket burn. The short blast came as their spacecraft headed for a Thursday evening splashdown in the Pacific. And now, as the spacecraft zips along at nearly 2,900 miles an hour, astronaut Thomas Mattingly is in the midst of a 1-hour walk in space to retrieve 6,500 feet of film at the rear of the command module. The splashdown rescue fleet is cruising towards station some 1,400 miles south of Honolulu. Weather in the splashdown area is expected to be satisfactory when the 11-day mission comes to an end.
It's over 1-2 punch to Muskie in primary voting. U.S. and Saigon ready to resume Paris peace talks. The president prepares to address the nation on Vietnam and increasing political tension in Bonn.
The 7 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, with reports from the major American networks, sports, and stock market activity.
Good morning. This is Milt Fullerton in Frankfurt. Aircraft carrier Ticonderoga has arrived at the projected Apollo 16 splashdown site. The spaceship, now streaking home from the moon, is scheduled to set down in the South Pacific, about 178 miles southeast of Christmas Island. That splashdown set for about 8:30 p.m. tomorrow, Central European time. Yesterday's major task in space was handled by Command Module pilot Ken Mattingly. Reed Collins of CBS News says Mattingly went for a walk yesterday, a vital stroll occurring about 200,000 miles from Earth.
Ken Mattingly's spacewalk 200,000 miles from Earth went off without a hitch. He retrieved more than 1 mile of film in the scientific bay at the rear of the service module, film which he had taken during his long solo flights around the moon. Retrieval is necessary because that service module is jettisoned before re-entry and is consumed in the Earth's atmosphere. A case containing some 60 million bacteria also was exposed to direct solar energy during the Mattingly walk, this to determine the effects of a space environment on life from Earth. Tomorrow, a news conference from space by the men, and Thursday, splashdown in the South Pacific. This is Reed Collins, CBS News, Space Headquarters, New York.
It's now 11 minutes, 15 seconds past 7 Central European Time.
Central European time is 4 o'clock. After more than 1 month, the Vietnam peace talks are to resume tomorrow in Paris.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good afternoon. This is Bob Andresen in Frankfurt. Also held a news conference 100,000 miles deep in space today to report firsthand on their moon exploration, which scientists feel will help unravel many secrets of lunar history. CBS newsman Steve Young reports from Houston.
The astronauts today have few scheduled activities, nothing more formidable than an in-flight news conference to answer the questions of newsmen covering the mission here. Scientists waiting for the return of those moon rocks have many questions still unanswered this morning. They especially want to know why the rocks evidently don't look the way it was anticipated that they would. And even before the return of the rocks, there are some lunar laments. Only one Apollo mission remains, with its landing site long since chosen. So there are many places scientists would like the Apollo mission to go to that it never will be able to visit. Last night, Commander John Young said that despite all the careful cleanup, a lot of regolith, or lunar soil, has managed to find its way into the command ship. Consequently, said Commander Young to Mission Control, you won't believe this, but every once in a while we see a pebble drifting by. Steve Young, CBS News, Manned Spacecraft Center, Houston.
It's 5 o'clock in Central Europe. Communist forces in South Vietnam cut Highway 1 in their attempt to slice the country in half.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good afternoon, this is John Schill reporting. Flight plan calls for a news conference from deep space later today. The 3 astronauts are streaking toward tomorrow's splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Mission Control in Houston will relay questions to the space trio this evening while they are about 100,000 miles from Earth. Later, a possible mid-course flight correction is scheduled.
It's 6 o'clock in Central Europe. President Nixon to address the nation on Vietnam, the peace talks to resume tomorrow in Paris, Senators Humphrey and McGovern come out on top in 2 presidential primaries, and the Agriculture Department says fruit prices went down last month.
The 6 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments with Today in Europe, compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, including reports from the major American networks.
Good evening. I'm David Minot in Frankfurt. Astronauts more than halfway home from the moon are spending a leisurely day today with a 30-minute televised news conference from space, the only major scheduled event. With splashdown set for tomorrow, officials in Houston are concerned primarily with the weather in the landing area. But as reported by NBC's Wilson Hall, the weather appears to be no problem.
Astronauts Young, Duke, and Mattingly devote their last full day in space to capsule-keeping duties, monitoring systems, taking navigation readings, and just plain resting. This afternoon, they'll hold a long-distance, 100,000-mile news conference, answering reporters' questions radioed to them by Mission Control. And if necessary, later today, a mid-course correction to put them right on the path for tomorrow afternoon's splashdown southeast of Christmas Island in the South Pacific.
Mission Control forecasts what the weather will be in the recovery area.
Weather in the landing site is good at the present time. A cloud base at 2,000 feet scattered. Visibility 10 nautical miles. Wind is out of the east at 10 knots. 3 feet wave height.
Splashdown scheduled for 2:44 Eastern Time tomorrow afternoon. Wilson Hall in the NBC News Apollo Space Center.
Central European time is 7 o'clock. After a suspension of more than 1 month, the Vietnam peace talks are to resume tomorrow in Paris.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good evening, this is Bob Andresen in Frankfurt. On one hand, deep space has the Apollo 16 flight plan today. Mission Control in Houston will relay questions to the astronauts 100,000 miles from Earth. Astronauts John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly are streaking toward a Pacific Ocean splashdown tomorrow. Most of the day will be spent monitoring systems, taking stellar navigation readings, and resting for the homecoming. The carrier Ticonderoga is on station about 1,500 miles south of Hawaii to pick up the 3 lunar explorers. Good weather is forecast for the recovery area when the astronauts arrive with their moon rocks.
Uvolnění napětí na Dálném východě, které podle Chauvelajova názoru nikdy nenastane, dokud pokračuje válka ve Vietnamu, při níž Peking a Washington podporují opačné strany. Válka skutečně může skončit jedině tak, že Spojené státy
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI. Good evening, this is John Sherr reporting. Mission Control reports Apollo 16 is having some trouble with its navigational computer system. Houston says astronaut Tim Mattingly reports a warning light that indicates the guidance computer is refusing to accept command. Control is studying the problem and talking with the astronauts on how to work out the difficulty. Earlier, the Apollo 16 astronauts said it would be premature to speculate on what secrets might be unlocked by the rocks they picked up on the moon. John Young said they will have to wait until they get back to the laboratory to find out what they have. The exchange came during a 20-minute conversation in which the capsule communicator at Houston relayed questions to the astronauts from geologists. The astronauts are expected to have more to say about the moon rocks during a news conference from their command ship later on this evening.
It's 10 o'clock in Central Europe. A report of a computer guidance problem aboard Apollo 16, speculation about the future of the Paris peace talks, a favorable report on the administration's anti-inflation battle, and Bond's political crisis.
The 10 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, with reports from the major American networks and comments.
Good evening, this is Bob Andresen in Frankfurt. UPI is quoting space officials in Houston as saying some trouble has developed in Apollo 16's navigational computer system. The news agency says Houston Control is studying a problem with the computer, which reportedly is refusing to accept commands. The difficulty, however, does not appear to be serious, and the engineers on the ground and the astronauts in space are working to iron the problem out. The 3 American spacemen are to conduct an in-space news conference in which Thomas Mattingly, Charles Duke, and John Young probably will be pressed into drawing some conclusions about the rocks and samples they are bringing back from the moon's surface. Such conclusions apparently will not be forthcoming, as Apollo 16 Commander John Young already has warned against any speculation on what lunar secrets the moon rocks will unlock. In Young's words, it ain't good science.
It's 7 o'clock in Central Europe. President Nixon announces continued troop pullout from Vietnam as North Vietnamese launch new attacks. Showdown today on West German government leadership. Muskie reportedly ready to quit his White House campaign. Apollo on schedule and on target for a Pacific splashdown.
The 10 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, with reports from the major American networks and comments.
Good morning, this is Milt Fullerton in Frankfurt.
Astronauts are picking up speed as they race toward a South Pacific rendezvous with their prime recovery ship, the aircraft carrier Ticonderoga. Astronauts John Young, Tom Mattingly, and Charles Duke are scheduled to splash down near Christmas Island in the South Pacific at about 8:30 p.m. today, Central European Time. AFN plans live coverage of that event. One problem which cropped up yesterday aboard Apollo was the breakdown of the wind-up shaver the spacemen have been using during this next-to-last moon landing mission. They held a news conference yesterday summing up their trip with the comment that they've seen more in 10 days than most people see in 10 lifetimes.
It's 12 noon in Central Europe. In Bonn, West German Chancellor Willy Brandt is defending his Ostpolitik in the face of an imminent attempt to vote him out of office.
AFN News and Sports Roundup. A summary of developments from the wires of the AP and UPI. First, the news.
Broadcasters on board the prime recovery ship for Apollo 16, the USS Ticonderoga, is cruising some 1,500 miles south of Honolulu in preparation for splashdown at 8:44 this evening, Central European Time. That's the...
It's 4 o'clock in Central Europe. Action continues in the communist offensive in Indochina.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good afternoon. This is Jan Wood, AFN News reporting. We will plunge into the Earth's atmosphere today for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Arrival is set for 8:44 p.m. Central European Time, 1,500 miles south of Hawaii. Spacemen John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly have 245 pounds of moon rocks from their lunar exploration. AFN News plans to present live coverage of the splashdown and recovery beginning at 8:30 this evening. That's news from AP and UPI.
Central European Time, it's 5 o'clock. Hanoi denies charges that its troops have invaded South Vietnam.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good afternoon. This is Bob Andresen in Frankfurt.
It's 6 o'clock in Central Europe. Defeat of an attempt to unseat West German Chancellor Willy Brandt, a stormy session of the Paris peace talks, more fighting around Quang Tri, and Senator Edmund Muskie changes his Democratic campaign strategy.
The 6 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments with Today in Europe, compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, including reports from the major American networks.
Good evening. I'm David Minot in Frankfurt. Our team returns to Earth this evening, climaxing a journey of discovery that it is believed will vastly enrich man's knowledge of the moon. John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly are to slice through the Earth's atmosphere 76 miles above the Pacific Ocean at 24,600 miles an hour. Splashdown is set for 8:44 this evening, Central European Time. AFN's live coverage of the splashdown is scheduled to begin at 8:30 this evening. CBS News reports that the main recovery ship sees the weather outlook in the landing zone as excellent.
Weather forecasters aboard the Ticonderoga recovery ship for Apollo 16 are predicting near-perfect weather for the South Pacific splashdown this afternoon. If all goes as scheduled, the command ship Casper will enter the Earth's atmosphere at 2:31. 8 minutes later, the drogue parachute will deploy, then the 3 main chutes. When Apollo 15 came back to Earth, only 2 of the main chutes opened. That made for a hard landing on splashdown. But engineers in Houston have taken precautions on this flight to see that all 3 parachutes open, giving Apollo 16 a softer 22-mile-per-hour landing. After recovery, astronauts Duke, Mattingly, and Young will spend 2 nights aboard the Ticonderoga, then a short helicopter flight to Hawaii's Hickman Field, where they board an Air Force transport plane to Houston. They should be home Saturday night. Del Vaughan, CBS News Space Headquarters in New York.
At 7 o'clock in Central Europe, Hanoi says secret talks on the Vietnam War are probable.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
It's 8 o'clock in Central Europe. North Vietnam calls secret talks in Paris probable.
AFN News from the wires of the AP and UPI.
Good evening, I'm Dan Allen, AFN News in Frankfurt. Two moon explorers have briefly triggered the jet engines of their craft as they head for the Pacific Ocean splashdown at 8:44 this evening Central European time. The aim of the firing is to aid the astronauts to zero in on their landing target about 178 miles southeast of Christmas Island. When the firing was made, Apollo 16 was 28,800 miles from Earth. The jet firing also assures that an equipment bay to be jettisoned before re-entry will not hit the nearby island of Pin Rin if it survives the heat of re-entry.
From the main task of picking up astronauts John Young, Charles Duke, and Ken Mattingly, the recovery force this time will also concentrate on recovering the main chutes of the command module. You'll remember the problem they had with Apollo 15 when one of the chutes did not deploy properly. This time they want to find out why. One theory is that when the command module dumps its remaining fuel load before it flies down, the fuel may have damaged one of the chute lines. So this time on Apollo 16, that excess fuel will not be released, and indeed will remain aboard the command module through the entire recovery maneuver. This is Richard O'Brien for ABC News aboard the USS Ticonderoga.
At this time, the American Forces Network resumes its coverage of the Apollo 16 moon mission, scheduled to end in a Pacific splashdown in about 14 minutes. Now to ABC News for live coverage.
Down in the Pacific, I'm Bill Larson with Merrill Muller at the Apollo News Center. Red? Apollo 16 now traveling at a velocity of 35,823 feet per second. Range to go to splash 1,678 nautical miles.
They're pretty close right now to their first entry point. That's atmospheric.
16 Houston is still looking good.
Hartsfield, that's on.
Should be about a minute away now from entering the Earth's atmosphere. You probably hear mark minus 1 minute. Velocity now 35,967 feet per second. Range to go 1,518 nautical miles.
Well, we have a chance, let's say very quickly, that Apollo 16 has been modified so that it doesn't have the parachute problems that it bedeviled Apollo 15 in the last few minutes of the landing. One of those chutes collapsed, as you know. This whole system has been modified to prevent that.
With the three chutes in use, the Apollo 30 seconds now. Velocity 36,094 feet per second. Range to go 1,357 nautical miles. With the three chutes, the splashdown speed for the command ship will be about 22 miles an hour, which is not too much of a jolt.
The jolt is going to be the pressures, the atmospheric pressure.
10 seconds, the velocity 36,173 feet per second. Range to go 1,270 nautical miles. We should have hit that.
We should be in it right now. I'm just waiting. If we get a blackout in a couple of seconds, that'll be it.
Should get blackout by now. We've seen a dropout in our telemetry data indicating Apollo 16 now passing through the Earth's atmosphere.
And just about now, the pilot should be experiencing gravity again. The first pull of gravity, about a half a G. They're going up to over 7 times their own weight in the pull of gravity in this sky. And incidentally, let me say quickly that there are 2 Orion communications. Apollo 16 with their own radar. There are 2 aircraft aloft, way up range and way down range from the Ticonderoga, the rescue carrier. And there are 4 helicopters. drops of the loft ready for the pickup.
1 minute, 5 seconds now since time of entry into the earset. 4 choppers on the scene carrying swim teams. One of the choppers is a photographic chopper, one that takes pictures of the recovery and of the recovery ship. And the USS Ticonderoga, the recovery ship, on station waiting for the astronauts to splash down. Let's go to the recovery ship and Bill Lindsay.
This is Bill Lindsay aboard the Ticonderoga. All the attention of the recovery forces here in the Pacific now is centered on the radio and radar equipment. With the astronauts of Apollo 16 in blackout, we are anxiously awaiting our first radio and radar contact. The first contact by radar may come from the big C-130 aircraft deployed 165 miles uprange and 165 miles downrange. The Tycho, the prime recovery ship, has slowed down a bit more as we are approaching the spot 5 miles from splashdown, which is where the Navy has planned to have the carrier when the astronauts hit the water. It's possible that the ship's own radar, much more powerful than that carried aboard the plane, will be the first to report the location of the command module after it completes the 3-minute blackout period in just about 1.5 minutes from now. And so it should be just a few minutes before we have an actual confirmation of the actual course of the command module. Bill Lindsay aboard the recovery ship, Ticonderoga.
And I think the angle of minus 6.55, almost exactly as predicted. John McLeish at Mission Control. Red, we might give a little explanation of this blackout period, too. It's nothing to worry about. There was some concern about it in the earlier Mercury flights until they found out what it was all about. The heat and the speed, the heat generated by the speed of the command ship coming in created what's called an ionization layer around the outside of the spaceship, which in turn causes a blackout in communications. In earlier flights, in the Gemini flights, they tried spraying some type of water around the spaceship as it came in to maybe break up this ionization and pull in communications. It didn't do any good, but at least at this point, and we have known that there's no problem with this blackout. It's something to be expected. Houston, the ship Ticonderoga reports a radar contact.
That's good. I'm going to go live to this Houston line and stay there. We're only a few seconds away from the first call from Apollo 16 after radio blackout. And the astronauts are...
We're at 3 minutes, 30 seconds now from time of entry. We should be passing out of the period of communications blackout. We'll stand by.
The astronauts will certainly have some comment on that ride. There's a carrier there.
16 Houston.
Roger, Roger.
Roger, how's it going? The ship reports the radar contact at 233 miles off on the ship.
I'm sorry we lost that comment from John Young as in answer to the question of how it's going.
Now 196 nautical miles. I picked it up, Red. He said, Roger, loud and clear.
No, I meant to see that.
We're getting a little tighter now, and everything looks good.
There's Hank Hartsfield saying everything looks good. The ship's radar comment with tracking was not quite as important as John Young's reaction to that ride. We missed it. Apollo is now 3 different channels. You will hear aircraft conversation.
Apollo Control, Houston, we're now receiving telemetry data through Araya here in Mission Control, and it looks good.
Araya, of course, being the downrange, in this case, the downrange radar tracking airplane.
Should be about 2 minutes and 45 seconds now away from the first chute, the small drogue chute that come out to slow down the descent of the Apollo 16 command ship. We'll be looking forward to that word in just a little less than 3 minutes. Apollo 16 headed for its splashdown in the Pacific. Communications have been received after a blackout period. I'm Bill Larson with Merrill Muller at the Apollo News Center. Red? We're in 5 minutes, 35 seconds since entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Still receiving good telemetry data.
They're receiving good voice, too, if they just let it through.
Predicted time of drogue deployment, 7 minutes, 46 seconds.
right on the mark, just where they expected it. Drogue being the very small chutes which drag out the main chute, but the first purpose of the drogue is to slow down Apollo 16. It'll be doing about 325 miles an hour speed when those drogues appear, and it has to slow it down until the drogues have to slow it down to about 125 when the main chutes appear.
When the main chutes come out, too, they don't pop. What's Bill Lindsay on the recovery ship?
This is Bill Lindsay aboard the USS Ticonderoga. The latest radar sightings from the ship are good. They say they have firm contact with the command module, which is approaching right on schedule from aft or uprange on the planned flight line. A sonic boom should be heard aboard the Ticonderoga in just a very few minutes, and that indicates the deployment of the drogue chutes will follow in just about 2 seconds. The deployment of these parachutes is of prime importance this time because of the difficulty with the parachutes on Apollo 15. Repeating the weather forecast, the weather, I should say, conditions are ideal for recovery. The temperature is about 83 for both the water, and the air. We have only very scattered clouds. It is clear overhead. The Ticonderoga has adjusted its position only about 3 degrees. We are steaming at about 3 knots to the northeast. We are now less than 10 miles from the planned target point. Bill Lindsay aboard the recovery ship Ticonderoga.
That sonic boom that Bill Lindsay was talking about is due in just about 10 seconds, and unfortunately we won't hear it, but he has to work in sync, of course, with all the communications and radar gear on the carrier, and we will be able to call him in, I think, in a few minutes, and we are less than 5 seconds away from drogue chute. We'll listen on all the lines to get confirmation of drogue.
Should hit now, Red.
I hear a lot of cheering. It's probably coming from the deck of the Ticonderoga. And Bill Lindsay can cut in.
Reports the apex and drogue chutes are out.
Well, there's telemetry confirmation that the drogue chutes are out, and Apollo 16 is slowing down. I think the Ticonderoga has some picture of the... Here comes Bill Lindsay from the deck of the Ticonderoga. The recovery ship off Christmas Island in the Central Pacific. They have Apollo 16 in sight.
This is Bill Lindsay aboard the Ticonderoga, which has the command module of Apollo 16 in sight directly off the bow. We were able to see the command module as the little drogue chute deployed. It's now coming down, and the main chutes are just now beginning to fill. We could see the command module on the drogue chutes, a spectacular sight as it came across the sky horizontally, then deployed the pilot chutes, and now all 3 of the main chutes directly to our front. And the excitement aboard this ship is something. All 3 of the chutes appear to be functioning normally. Bill Lindsay aboard the recovery ship Ticonderoga.
Stand by, sir. And of course, as Bill Lindsay just told you, everything is perfect, and I'm not certain somebody's going to have to steer something, because this is close to the carrier. It could be the closest Apollo landing yet. Let's go back to Bill Lindsay on the Ticonderoga.
This is Bill Lindsay aboard the Ticonderoga, and the comment I just heard beside me describes it all. Beautiful. The command module Casper is now at about 8,000 feet. All 3 of the big red and white main chutes have deployed perfectly. We can tell from here that there appears to be no difficulty whatsoever. Their ride from the 10,000-foot level will take about 4 minutes and 47 seconds. About 30 seconds of that is gone by. And for the first time in my memory of the Apollo series, we can see the drogue and the pilot chutes as they are floating down. They're now about 3,000 feet above the command module. And of course, one of the prime goals of this mission is to recover everything that comes down. That is the drogue and the pilot chutes, the main chutes, of course the astronauts and their command module, and the apex cover. All these to be used back at Casper. This recovery mission so far has gone letter perfect. And this crew aboard the Ticonderoga deserves to have it that way, as well as, of course, the astronauts.
Let's join Houston to see what communications we're getting from the spaceship and young Mattingly at Duke.
Of the rescue helicopters. The whole force, he commands the whole force.
The crew aboard the Ticonderoga can now see the spacecraft visually from the ship. 11 minutes now since time of entry into the Earth's atmosphere.
And only about 2 minutes and 20 seconds to go till splash. Commander Pfizer is in contact with both the ship, Houston, and the astronauts in Apollo 16. I heard him call them. I heard the acknowledgement.
There is no sway on the module coming down.
That was Commander Pfizer saying there's no sway on the module, meaning no sway under the chutes for Apollo 16. A very soft ride right now for the 3 astronauts.
It will not come in flat on that heat shield. It will come in at sort of an angle to catch the edge of the heat shield to absorb some of the impact, reduce some of the impact.
No one yet estimated how close this is to the carrier, but it's pretty close because there was eyeball.
Control, Houston, recovery support here in Mission Control reports that the astronauts describe their condition as outstanding. We're at 12 minutes now since entry into the Earth's atmosphere.
We have the helicopters up the window. That was from Apollo 16. They see the choppers that are moving in to pick them up. They see them out the window. We still need an estimate of how close this is to the carrier because there was eyeball sighting by the crew of the Ticonderoga even before the television camera threw up a picture for Houston.
Ticonderoga tried to stay at about a 5-mile radius from the splashdown point at the time of entering the Earth's atmosphere.
We're only a little more than 30 seconds to splash, about 40.
Apollo Control, Houston, an observer on the Ticonderoga estimates the distance from the ship about 1 mile.
1 mile, right? Will be the landing record of any space flight. 1 mile away from the recovery carrier. They got about 15 seconds before they touch down in the Pacific.
Many of the early crews had threatened to try and land on the deck of the recovery carrier. This was pretty near that point.
Here's coming up. Flash due in 10, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 seconds late on splash. 4 seconds late. And that was very comfortable. Let's go to Bill Lindsay on the aircraft carrier Ticonderoga.
We are waiting for a report. The command module has hit in the stable 2 position. That means that it is upside down in the water. It also means several other things. It means that the astronauts will have no radio contact to report how they survived the splashdown until the command module is righted. The helicopters continue to circle very low. The command module should right itself. The astronauts will inflate manually 3 inflatable uprighting bags, which are attached to the top of the command module. And this sea state of about 5 feet should help those bags to vibrate or rock the command module and to bring it to the stable 1 upright position with the bottom down. And that will expose the radio antenna through which the astronauts will make contact with the recovery forces.
Apollo 16 in a stable 2 condition at the present time with the apex end of the spacecraft underwater.
There is a backup system on this flotation gear. Bill Lindsay mentioned the astronauts would control it to flip themselves back upright, and I believe they've done so already, although we're not quite sure, but it doesn't take very long. In any case, there's a backup system, an automatic system that inflates the airbag in the nose of Apollo 16 or just around the side, and that flips the module back upright again. I am hearing one of the choppers. They will tell us, I think, faster than anyone, whether Apollo 16 is upright. I believe it is.
Those swim teams in the helicopter are moving in.
No, still stable 2, the chopper says. But this shouldn't take long. In any case, it's airtight. and full of oxygen. So getting the crew comfortable. Swimmers are going in anyway. They can help. They have, of course, a collar, a raft, but that collar is no good attached to Apollo 16 until it's upright. They do have other gear to help the flotation business. Apollo 16 around. Someone said they've got named Shoot. I think that's a drag line, and this will be the first time they will have picked up what they want. First swim team is in the water.
The first swimmer now in the water to put the sea anchor onto the command module.
That swim team is led by maybe Washington State.
Roger. That sea anchor is actually like a little parachuted pump. I think it extends about 50 feet behind the spaceship once it's attached.
Oh, 3 teams in the water now. That will be 9 men to help in this situation. Uprighting bags can be seen. Apollo 16's coming around to a vertical position.
The swimmers from the Earth Landing System helicopter are now on the water. They will endeavor to retrieve the parachutes as well as the apex cover.
Still in a stable 2 position, though, I think that. It's not uprighted yet.
3 of the swimmers have gone out after the nose cone of Apollo 16 and the throat chute, and 3 others are after the main parachute.
One of the parachutes reported submerged, the other 2 on the surface.
There are 3 swimmers, and that's Lieutenant Kashita's team around Apollo 16.
Well, the uprighting bags are completely inflated at this time. The command module is in a 90-degree position.
That means it's vertical on the water. It's not yet upright, totally upright, but it's coming around.
Get that third bag in
horizontal on the water instead of vertical. That's it. That's upright.
Roger.
That means now the swim teams will be able to move in, attach that sea anchor, and then start putting that flotation collar around the command ship. That flotation collar, which will circle it. Let's pick this up, the astronaut condition.
Apollo 16 is recovery.
No answer yet. This may have something to do with it having been in the stable tube.
Recovery, Hilo is making its approach to the command module.
Helicopter.
Recovery, this is Apollo 16. We'll finally get this thing right set up, and looking forward to seeing you.
That was, I think the voice of John Young. Command ship riding very stably in the water now.
There's one swimmer right close to Apollo 16. He's got a telephone.
Around the apex cover, you might watch him. I guess you know that. One of the swimmers in the water now, preparing to attach the sea anchor. A report from the crew of Apollo 16 says they're doing fine. It is relatively slow, about 10 yards. The swimmers are positioning it away from the command module. Here, the uprighting bags are completely inflated. The turret is partially inflated.
That's why it was so
The
slow.
anchor about 8 feet around. It's made of a cloth designed to drag and slow down the spacecraft in water.
That, I think, was Charlie Duke.
May have been. Condition of the astronauts outstanding, he says.
The wind's out here about 12 feet knots. Sea swell running about 4 feet. The command module is running very nicely. The swimmer is attaching the sea anchor to the command module.
The winds have picked up slightly, but this aids the helicopters. This helps them.
Helps them keep on position. In very calm weather, it's very hard to maintain stable.
We heard John Young aboard Casper reporting the condition of the crew as outstanding.
Very shortly, we should see one of the rafts pushed out of the recovery helicopter. It'll be an orange raft, orange-colored raft, bright orange. And one side of it is shaped to fit snugly around the command ship.
The first swimmer in the water now in the process of attaching the sea anchor. This made of cloth designed to drag in the water and slow down the spacecraft.
Riding very well now, Apollo 16, the command ship. A little rock, and I hope nobody gets seasick. That has happened, by the way, on some previous missions. One of the helicopters
Inspected now by the first swimmer. The next two swimmers will take a flotation collar with them. And there are two attachments in the front part of the spacecraft. And it unfolds like a caterpillar. While one swimmer steadies this flotation collar, the other swimmer takes it around, wraps it around the spacecraft.
And it also has to be anchored underneath. It has a series of small chain-like fixtures that attach it firmly to the command ship.
This is the first swimmer in the water, now cutting away the parachute shroud lines, freeing the spacecraft from the parachute.
This flotation collar, by the way, is sort of a double. In case the outer portion were punctured, the...
Okay, so we're going to stay back up here on calm until sit past to get the collar wrapped.
I am leaving Commander Pfizer with the recovery forces.
The swimmer has used the sea anchor detected the pulley of the module, and he's giving you a signal for the recovery helo to deploy the flotation collar.
Quite possibly.
And the recovery helo is making its approach on the module.
Three rafts in the water now. Another swimmer gets in. My memory serves me right. There should be what's called a whale boat out in the area now to keep a lookout for sharks.
Yeah, two swimmers and flotation collar have been dropped now into the water adjacent to the spacecraft.
As long as Bill brought up sharks, you might say that the Apollo spacecraft puts out a shark repellent automatically when it hits the water. And, of course, the swimmers have it with them. This is the air-to-air conversation you're hearing, and it is from the command helicopter to the other helicopters in the area. And there are four.
Now 9 swimmers in the water, 3 who will be working with the crew of Apollo 16 as they leave the spacecraft. The other 6 swimmers in an endeavor now to recover the parachute.
I think this is the largest number of swimmers ever dropped out of a submarine. But I can recall.
It is because they're This is the first time they've had the opportunity to grab the drogue chute and the nose cone of Apollo 16 and the main chute, all of the main chutes complete. In the past, they have not dropped all the swimmers because the drogue chutes usually sank too quickly for them.
I recall we have a report that all 3 main parachutes are being pulled into the raft. And meanwhile, at the command module, the bungee cord is around the command module now, and the flotation collar will be encircling it.
Command module floating very well without the flotation collar, but it's...
The collar is 3/4 of the way around the module now.
Flotation collar 3/4 away around the command ship. Very shortly, that will be inflated. and stabilize the command ship even further, keep it from rocking anymore.
The flotation collar now halfway around the command module. It's made of a rubberized cloth
carrier pickup, quite a few, in fact. What's the little ceremony? It's King Neptune ceremony when you cross the equator. I swear Charlie Duke's getting his baptism now. They can't give him one.
They couldn't. It's nothing like what he's going
through. The flotation collar is attached next to the sea anchor. The collar will be inflated.
However, I will say one thing. After Duke's initiation like this, at least he'll be able to sit down.
Incidentally, while we have a moment to say so, the Ticonderoga is commanded by Captain Ed Boyd, United States Navy. He was made a Rear Admiral this morning.
And it's one of the largest ships on recovery in quite some time. Carries a crew of about 1,500 men.
After inflation of the flotation collar, the three swimmers will climb up on the collar and attach restraining straps on top of the spacecraft where the uprighting bags are located.
That collar also gives the swim teams and the astronauts sort of a little platform to work from as well.
I'm being asked to do something we just did, so I think we'll wait a minute to listen to you.
Yeah, get it up to the command module.
Communications between the recovery helicopter and the command ship.
The slight chop on the waves caused by the 10 to 12 knot wind is making the job of installing the flotation collar go a little slower.
We expect that President Nixon will be calling the astronauts as soon as they're safely aboard the Ticonderoga and settled down and comfortable. And, of course, depending on the President's schedule today, I haven't seen the White House appointment calendar for today, but it is routine for the President to call the returning Apollo astronauts on the carrier.
The flotation collar now being inflated.
Command ship riding very, very well, about 1,500 miles south of Hawaii. It's awfully difficult, unless you've been there, to realize the excitement that's generated when those three chutes pop open and this command ship drops down into the water.
The ship reported to be just about a mile away from the floating command module.
Egress raft is in the water now. That's the raft into which the Apollo 16 astronauts will climb once the hatch on their command ship is open. And once they're in the raft,
Ticonderoga, you are cleared to assist Apex.
Once they're in the raft, they'll be lifted aboard a recovery helicopter and flown back to the USS Ticonderoga, the recovery ship. Raft is downweighted. And that's the situation with Apollo 16 on the water and the astronauts safely waiting pickup in our coverage of the flight of Apollo 16 from ABC Radio News.
This is the American Forces Network Europe, and as you have just heard, the Apollo 16 astronauts are back on Earth. Central European time is now 1 minute and 25 seconds past 9 o'clock. Apollo 16's three astronauts returned to Earth this evening, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean and ending a lunar voyage that's expected to vastly enrich man's knowledge of the moon. John Young, Charles Duke, and Thomas Mattingly are bringing home a record 245 pounds of rocks and other material, which they feel might contain the volcanic evidence they sought when they started out on the flight 11 days ago. Their command ship Casper hit the water about 175 miles southeast of Christmas Island. The astronauts were lifted by helicopter to the carrier Ticonderoga. First, they would get a medical examination and then 2 nights of rest as the ship steams toward Hawaii.
Un programma di attualità, curiosità e varietà a cura di Giancarlo Ciccone.
It's 10 o'clock in Central Europe. The Apollo 16 astronauts are back on Earth. The U.S. accuses the North Vietnamese of bad faith and threatens another suspension of the Paris talks. The vote of confidence against the coalition government of West Germany fails and Muskie drops out of the primary races.
The 10 o'clock report, an expanded summary of world developments compiled from the wires of the AP and UPI, with reports from the major American networks and comments.
Good evening, Gary Boswell reporting. The Apollo 16 astronauts landed in the Pacific today carrying a treasure of 245 pounds of moon rock. John Young, Thomas Mattingly, and Charles Duke splashed down safely, having rescued their $445 million expedition to the lunar highlands from the brink of failure. As it was, it returned a day early. It is the United States' fifth successful moon flight in the $25 billion program, and it has the potential of being the most rewarding since man first reached the moon in July of 1969. The command ship Casper set down in the Pacific about 15 minutes ago. The command module appeared to hit the water hard and flipped upside down, but this was corrected by 3 flotation bags inflated on the top of the spaceship. The astronauts were ferried to the aircraft carrier Ticonderoga, where they now will undergo medical tests. They'll remain on the ship for the next 2 nights to catch up on a little sleep and should be home by Saturday.